Well, this is certainly the shortest gap between recordings. Having just recorded the Wolves of Eternity video last night, I find myself here ready to talk about The Setting Sun, although only so much so. This is Osamu Dazai's seminal work alongside No Longer Human. I believe he only wrote two novels in his life, very short life, and a lot has been said about Dazai, so there's only so much that I feel like I can add to the conversation, and only so much I feel like adding to the conversation, because in many ways this book is not entirely my type of book. I tend to prefer longer books that go delve more deeper into character psyches, whereas this is a much shorter work along with No Longer Human, which No Longer Human is more about individual character psyche. But in particular, The Setting Sun is about the transition between pre-war and post-war Japan, between the aristocracy and also the artistic class. But what really compelled me to revisit it was that I haven't read Dazai since it's been about 8 years maybe. And it was sort of at the start of when I started transitioning away from reading fantasy into more literary style works, because I had just gotten my first job at the time, tutoring at a middle school, and with the income that I got, I would buy some of the books that I really wanted to read, because part of the reason I was so into fantasy at the time was because books were really expensive on sort of college income, not having much money, and I don't really personally care for library books. I support libraries and I'm absolutely behind everything that they do, but I find the way other human beings treat books to be absolutely disgusting, and have seen some of the despicable shit that people do with library books, and I don't even want to touch them. Just ew, fucking nasty. Anyway, so finally getting to read No Longer Human, which, as short as it was and as limited as I was on budget through college, I read a lot of fantasy books, because in terms of bang for your buck, you got 5,000 to 8,000 or more page books. So to finally sit down and read that was interesting, and I wanted to revisit Dazai, as I said, especially in light of the fact that there are new translations of his work coming out now. So I didn't quite read both translations side by side, but I actually have two versions of the book here. One, the new translation by Juliet Winters Carpenter, and the other one, the older translation by Keene. And the reason I did this was because I find Carpenter's translation, and this is really going to be more what this video is about. In fact, this is mostly just going to be a shorter video. I'm not even going to bother reviewing the book, because it's so damn short. You can go and find that on your own if you want. Mostly I'm just going to be talking about what I felt about this new translation, comparing it some to the old translation. And coming clean, it's a bit of an endeavor, because I don't understand Japanese very well. Certainly not well enough to read a complete novel. I even would struggle with a short story. So to that extent, I cannot speak to what the original Japanese is. And in a way, all I really have are these two translations. And given the dichotomy between them, it makes me all the more aware of my ignorance in being unable to say which is the better translation, because not knowing the original text, I don't know that. So really all I can do is talk to my feelings in terms of reading it. And in that sense, I actually find Carpenter's new translation a bit grating, in the sense that some of the language that it uses is way too contemporary for my liking, given how old the work is. For instance, characters will say stuff like Zippo instead of nothing. The word peanut gallery is used at one point. Just so many modern turns of phrase, which in a work that I know was written in 1940s Japan wouldn't exist. And there's a balance when it comes to translation between sort of capturing the literal essence of the literal text and the essence of the work. And in that sense, again, we're kind of blindly grasping, those of us who can't read in the original translation, because the nuance and understanding, not just of the face value text, but of the evolution of words and language. And to give a demonstration of what I'm talking about, think about something even as recent as Lord of the Rings, and the way so much of the language and structure and form and words are used, and how speech has evolved so much since then. You'll find, I think, it to be a very different style, and it works well in terms of what Lord of the Rings is going for, this more narrative style voice, a voice that, in my opinion, is much better heard than read. I don't actually like reading Lord of the Rings. The prose to me sounds very much like something meant to be spoken, not read. So in that sense, I find Carpenter's translation to be much more grating, where I actually find the language used in Keene's translation, the longer sentences, which is another thing that Carpenter's translation does, is it cuts it up into shorter sentences. So having Keene's longer sentences, to me, adds more weight to what is being said, gives it more of a refined, older style, something I would expect more of from the time, having read some works by like Soseki. In fact, this work reminded me, I kept thinking a lot of one of Soseki's works, specifically Sorekara, which I'd read the translation of, and I kept thinking of a lot when reading this. So in that sense, but that isn't to say that Carpenter's translation isn't without merit. There are certain times in the Keene's translation where I wonder if names of things haven't been changed in order to appeal more to a Western audience. Like she mentions the brother character going to read shochu going to drink shochu in Carpenter's translation, whereas in Keene's translation it's gin. But again, lacking the original, I don't know which is more accurate to what Dazai really wrote. All I know is that, to me, personally, I found Carpenter's translation to be very readable, very easily readable, and I think will be very much approachable for a lot of people. Not that there's anything wrong with Keene's, but it almost ends up being too readable, to the point where the short, quick sentences don't have kind of the flow or the evocative nature that I've come to expect from a lot of Japanese literature, especially at the time, that when I read the same passage in Keene's translation, it feels like it has more weight to it. So, but in terms, that being said, it's very much my personal thing and what I'm looking for. I think if somebody has never read Dazai and just wants to read the book and doesn't really have any interest, they just want to get the story, then probably I would recommend Carpenter's translation, just in the sense that it's so fucking easy to read. I just sat down and read the whole thing in one day. But I honestly think that if you're more willing to put up with, or rather, if you're looking for something more, a little bit archaic in some of the language, and you don't mind the fact that there are a few Americanisms here and there, potentially, like I said, I don't have access to the original, but some of my research has suggested that it's a more Americanized version of the story, then I think that the language that Keene uses does a better job of capturing what I personally would expect of the writing of that era, given some of the other Japanese writers of the time that I have read. Like I said, having read Soseki translated by multiple different people, having read Mishima again through a few different translators of his work, and Abe, I find that Carpenter's prose ends up just way too modern. It loses that feeling of era, of time period, of weight to it, that I think Keene's does a much better job of translating. And now that this has become public domain, I'm really interested to see whether or not, I think David Boyd has a translation of No Longer Human coming out later this year, or rather 2026. Still 10 more days of 2025. So I really will be curious to see how that ends up, because while I do plan on reading No Longer Human next, I might not make a video about it because same thing, I don't feel like there's a whole lot to say about it that hasn't already been said. It's a small book and so many people have read it, so I don't feel like I can add much to the conversation. The fact that I already have Carpenter's translation, Keene's translation, and then when David Boyd's translation comes out, I look forward to reading that, because to me, like, an ideal version of the book would probably lie between the two. Having a more, like I said, weightier, longer sentence, sort of smoother flow rather than the sort of stop-go prose of short sentences, but at the same time keeping things more true and authentic to the Japanese numbers and the Japanese terms and whatnot. So that's all I really have to say on The Setting Sun, other than it was interesting, and it's short. You can read it in a day. I read it in a day easily, and it's a decent insight into that period of time. And I think that anybody who did enjoy The Setting Sun, book recommendation. I don't usually do book recommendations, but check out Sorekara. It's not as psychological, but it deals with a similar time period and a similar conflict between traditional Japanese aristocracy and the common man. It's by Natsume Soseki, and check it out. Hope you enjoy it. And until then, take care.